I watched my wife walk into the courtroom like she owned it. Designer suit, polished smile, and a lawyer who charged more per hour than most people made in a week. She didn't look like the woman I'd married 12 years ago. She looked like someone on a mission to destroy me. She had recordings, edited ones, videos of me raising my voice, snippets of arguments twisted into something darker. She called it proof of abuse. I called it what it was, manipulation. But in court, truth comes second to performance. And she had rehearsed hers well. The judge looked convinced before I'd even said a word. Her lawyer played the recordings, and every carefully cut piece made me look like a monster. She cried on cue, talked about fear, about years of emotional damage, about how I controlled everything, including her freedom. She demanded half my business, the house, and monthly payments to rebuild her life. The lawyer nodded along like a preacher at a sermon. I sat there, still as stone, not because I was calm, but because I'd learned long ago that silence unnerves liars more than shouting ever could. My name is Ryan Callahan, 38 years old, founder of a small but successful security company in Austin, Texas. Ironically, I built my career protecting people from threats. I never thought the biggest one would come from the person I shared a bed with. We'd built the business together, or at least that's what she told people. In reality, she handled marketing while I did the heavy lifting, design, installation, contracts. Still, when the money started coming in, she wanted more. More control, more attention, more of everything. The breaking point came when she met someone new, a client, actually, a corporate lawyer who wanted to invest in the company. Turns out his investment went a lot deeper than business. I didn't find out until months later, when our bank accounts started moving in ways that didn't make sense. And now here we were. Her attorney, a shark named Evan Price, was presenting a case built on fake evidence, edited footage, and outright lies. And it was working. The judge asked if I had anything to say. I stood up slowly, buttoned my jacket, and looked right at my wife. She froze for the first time that day. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. She forgot who installed the cameras. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Her lawyer blinked. She went pale. Because every edited recording she brought was built from footage I'd set up myself, on a system that logged every file, every edit, every deletion. And what she didn't realize was that the original, uncut versions were still sitting in encrypted storage, waiting for me to bring them out. That was the moment the balance shifted. But back then, no one in that courtroom understood just how deep this game went, or how far I'd already planned ahead. Because while she thought she was framing me, I'd been documenting her. Quietly, methodically, for months. When I left the courtroom that day, I didn't speak to anyone. Not to my lawyer, not to my so-called friends who suddenly started avoiding eye contact. I just walked to my car, sat in silence, and let the weight of it sink in. My wife had tried to destroy me using my own technology. She had edited my cameras, my system, my work, and almost won. But almost doesn't count in my world. My company, Callahan Security Systems, specialized in discrete home installations, high-end cameras, encrypted feeds, full automation. My clients included judges, attorneys, and corporations who valued privacy. What they didn't know was that every system I installed also recorded metadata, timestamps, edit logs, access trails. You could cut, trim, or manipulate video, but you couldn't fake the system's memory. And she'd forgotten that. Her lawyer thought I'd been caught off guard, that I'd walk in unprepared, humiliated, cornered. But they underestimated how I operate. When I first suspected something was wrong, months before she filed for divorce, I didn't react. I listened. I watched. And I collected. At first, it was small things. Deleted text messages on her phone that she'd forgotten to clear from the cloud. Late-night calls from unknown numbers. Money moving between accounts labeled as marketing expenses. When I asked about them, she smiled sweetly and said I was overthinking. That was her tell. When she played calm, it meant she was hiding something. So I stopped asking questions and started preparing. I backed up every camera feed in the house to an off-site server under a false company name. I installed 2 hidden cameras, one in my office, another in the kitchen, both disguised as motion sensors. She never noticed. I also mirrored her phone to a test device at work, something I'd built for corporate investigations. Nothing illegal, nothing invasive, just observation. By the time she filed for divorce, I already had everything I needed: financial records, emails, footage, and proof she'd been seeing Evan Price long before she claimed our marriage had fallen apart. But I didn't plan to use it right away. Timing mattered. The judge had set a follow-up hearing in 3 weeks. That was my window. So while she spent her days polishing her victim's story, I spent mine building a case. Not for the court, but for the truth. Every move she made, every lie she told, every proof she tried to forge was another brick in the wall she was building around herself. And I was letting her finish it quietly. Because when the time came, I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to make sure that wall collapsed on her. The night after court, I didn't sleep. I sat in my office surrounded by the quiet hum of servers, the soft blue light blinking in rhythm like a heartbeat. On the desk lay 2 folders, one with her evidence, one with mine. The difference between them was simple. Hers was crafted, mine was real. When you work in surveillance long enough, you learn one thing. People always reveal themselves when they think no one's watching. That's how I built my business. That's how I built my case. A week before she filed, I'd caught the first sign. My assistant, Mark, had forwarded me an invoice that didn't match our accounting software. The payment was listed under consulting fees, but was wired to a law firm, Evan Price's firm. She'd used the company's funds to pay for her divorce lawyer before she even filed. I said nothing, just stored it. Then came the video. She must have spent hours editing it, slicing moments of frustration into a false story of rage. I remembered the night clearly. One of those long evenings when the power flickered and I was trying to fix a router while she shouted from the kitchen about me, never listening. The raw footage showed her throwing the first object, not me. The edit she brought to court started after that moment. That night, I restored the original file. The timestamp, audio log, and motion sensor data all matched perfectly. No cuts, no splices. I labeled it Exhibit 1 and backed it up 3 times. In the following days, I traced her access points. Every edit she made on her laptop left a digital footprint. Her video editor was tied to her iCloud, and her iCloud was tied to my company's security network because I'd installed her home system myself. Each file had metadata showing date, time, and user. She hadn't just faked the evidence, she'd done it on my servers. Still, I said nothing. Because timing wasn't just important, it was everything. If I showed my hand too early, she'd twist it again, claim invasion of privacy, manipulation, control. So I kept quiet, waiting, preparing for the exact moment to turn everything she'd built upside down. I wasn't planning revenge. I was building proof, layered, undeniable, and impossible to twist. Because I knew once I moved, there would be no going back. And when I did, the courtroom wouldn't be the only place she'd lose. She'd lose the narrative, the sympathy, and the illusion of control she'd built so carefully. She thought she was playing me, but I'd built the game board. 3 days before the next hearing, I met with my attorney, a calm, gray-haired man named Paul Granger who'd seen everything from corporate takeovers to family implosions. He studied the evidence I handed him, timelines, access logs, raw footage, financial records, and after an hour of silence, he leaned back and said he'd never seen anything this clean. He asked if I was sure I wanted to go through with it. I said yes, because this wasn't about winning anymore. It was about truth. Paul warned me she'd try to play the sympathy card again, maybe even cry on the stand. He said judges were human. Emotion worked better than logic. I told him not to worry. I wasn't bringing emotion. I was bringing facts. The morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn. The city outside was still dark, quiet, like it was holding its breath. I drove to the courthouse without music, without distraction. My focus was absolute. When I walked into the courtroom, she was already there. Perfect makeup, trembling hands, eyes red from what I guessed was a long night of rehearsing pain. Her lawyer whispered something that made her smile faintly. It was a performance, and I knew every beat of it. The judge opened the session, asking for additional evidence. Her lawyer went first, submitting more edited recordings, each one darker than the last. In one clip, my voice sounded colder, harsher. The judge's brow tightened. I let it play. When it ended, Paul stood, handed the bailiff a flash drive, and said only one sentence. "These are the original files, Your Honor." The judge pressed play. Silence filled the room except for the clear audio of her voice shouting first. throwing objects, laughing between insults. Then my voice, calm, measured, trying to de-escalate. No shouting, no threats, just her unraveling. Her face changed as the judge watched. The tears vanished. The trembling stopped. The mask slipped. And when the video ended, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. Paul handed over the metadata reports, each showing file creation dates, edit timestamps, and the IP address used, hers. The judge asked if I had anything else to add. I said yes. I pulled out a folder of bank records, proof she'd used company funds to pay her divorce lawyer and had moved money into an offshore account 2 weeks before filing. The judge's expression hardened. That was the moment I knew it was over. Not officially, not yet, but in spirit. She looked at me, pale, defeated, like she was realizing the truth for the first time. She'd gone to war with a man who built systems designed to never lose data. And I never lost track of the truth. The silence in that courtroom was the kind that makes every sound feel louder. The clicking of pens, the shuffle of paper, the nervous breathing of people realizing the story had turned. Her lawyer asked for a recess, but the judge refused. She wanted to see the rest. Paul moved through the evidence like a surgeon, precise, methodical, cutting through every lie. The financial records showed money transfers from our joint business account to a private one in her name. The metadata from the recordings confirmed she'd altered the files on her laptop, using an editing program licensed under her email. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the nights she claimed I'd lost control. When Paul finished, the judge turned to her. The question was simple. Why would she edit the videos? My wife tried to cry again, tried to shake her head and say it wasn't her. But her voice trembled, her story cracked, and her lawyer looked like a man realizing his paycheck had just gone up in smoke. The judge ordered an immediate audit of the remaining evidence. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, still and silent, watching the life she'd built on lies start to collapse piece by piece. I'd expected relief, maybe satisfaction. But all I felt was clarity. When the hearing adjourned, she avoided my eyes. Her lawyer whispered something about damage control, but there wasn't much left to control. The judge scheduled a final ruling for the following week. Until then, everything was frozen, our assets, the accounts, even the house. That night, I drove to my office instead of going home. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the glow of the monitors, watching the security feeds. The empty house looked colder than I remembered. Her things were still there, her shoes by the door, the framed photos on the mantel, but it all felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else's life. I poured myself a drink and watched the footage from the last few months again. Her coming home late, her whispering on the phone in the kitchen, her lawyer's car parked down the street more than once. Every frame reminded me of how deliberate it had all been. She hadn't just wanted the house or the money. She wanted to erase me, rebuild her story with her as the victim and me as the villain. And for a while, she almost did. But she made one mistake. She forgot that every lie leaves a trace. And I built my life around finding traces no one else could see. The week between hearings felt like a countdown I'd been waiting for all my life. Every day was quieter than the last, but the kind of quiet that hides pressure beneath it. People at the office kept their distance. They'd seen the news, local coverage of a divorce case involving forged digital evidence, and a security expert. They didn't know the details, but they knew enough to stay out of it. Paul called every morning to update me on the audit. The forensic team confirmed everything. The files had been altered from her devices using her credentials. Even the recovery logs traced back to her IP. It was airtight. Still, I didn't celebrate. In my line of work, victory isn't about beating someone. It's about closing every possible loophole before they find one. 2 nights before the final hearing, I got an email from an anonymous address. No text, just an attachment. A single image, me sitting at my desk, timestamped 2 hours earlier. It wasn't from my security feed. It was from a hidden camera, one I didn't install. For the first time in months, my pulse spiked. I swept the office, running a signal scan across every inch of the room. I found it, a small wireless camera tucked behind a vent, battery-powered, transmitting to an external network. The connection was encrypted, but not well. Within minutes, I traced it to an IP registered to Evan Price's law firm. So they were still playing, still trying to find leverage. Maybe to make me look like I'd planted evidence, maybe to prove I'd been spying illegally. I unplugged the camera, sealed it in an evidence bag, and sat back down. They wanted me to react, to panic. I didn't. I started documenting timestamps, access points, network routes. By dawn, I'd built another report, ready to hand over to Paul and the court. The next morning, I sent a short message to her lawyer's firm. No threats, no accusations. Just one line. Your system has been compromised. You should check your vents. No response, but I didn't need one. I knew the message landed exactly where it needed to. By the time the final hearing arrived, the balance of power wasn't just shifting, it was collapsing. They'd tried to bury me with false evidence. Now I was walking in with proof they'd crossed into criminal territory. She thought she'd reached the end of the story. She didn't realize I was just beginning mine. The final hearing began on a gray Monday morning. The air in the courtroom felt heavier than before, like everyone could sense the weight of what was about to happen. She sat across the room, perfectly composed again, though her eyes darted toward me every few seconds. Her lawyer looked confident, but forced, too polished, too controlled. I'd seen that look before, right before a system crash. Paul handed the judge the new report we'd compiled. He didn't need to say much. The facts spoke for themselves. The hidden camera, the trace to Evan Price's firm, the metadata that proved an attempt to intercept privileged material. The judge's expression darkened. She asked her lawyer if he was aware of any such device. He denied it, of course, claiming ignorance. But the IP address tied directly back to their office network. It wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. The judge ordered an immediate recess. For an hour, I waited in the hallway, watching her pace, whispering furiously into her phone. Paul said quietly that the case had now shifted beyond divorce. We were entering criminal territory, evidence tampering, invasion of privacy, possible obstruction. The calm I'd carried for months stayed with me. I wasn't angry anymore, just focused. When the session resumed, the tone had changed completely. The judge's voice was cold, deliberate. She questioned her lawyer directly, asking if he understood the severity of tampering with evidence in an ongoing trial. He tried to redirect, to paint it as a misunderstanding, but the damage was done. Then came the decision. The court found her claims unsubstantiated and her evidence fraudulent. The financial documents proved misuse of company funds. The recordings she submitted were ruled inadmissible due to manipulation. The judge dismissed her case entirely and transferred temporary control of all joint assets to me pending further investigation. Her face went pale. For a second, she looked like she didn't recognize me at all, like the version of me she'd built in her lies had vanished, leaving only the real one. The man who'd seen everything, said nothing, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. As we left the courtroom, Paul said quietly that the state might pursue separate charges against her and her attorney. I nodded once, then walked out into the rain. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was finality. The kind that comes after months of silence, patience, and precision. She'd built her case on illusions. I'd built mine on truth. And truth always leaves a bigger mark. For days after the ruling, the silence felt unreal. No calls from lawyers, no statements to sign, no headlines flashing my name. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a storm you thought would never end. But I knew better than to mistake peace for closure. A week later, Paul called. He told me the district attorney's office had opened an inquiry into the surveillance camera incident and the falsified evidence. Both my wife and her attorney were under review. He said they might reach out for a statement. I said they wouldn't need one. Everything they needed was already documented. That night, I drove to the lake outside the city, the one place I used to go before all of this began. The air was cold, the water black and still. I stood there for a long time, thinking about how something as small as a lie can grow until it consumes everything around it. She had wanted control, but what she really wanted was power. And when people like her lose it, they burn everything trying to get it back. Paul later told me her lawyer resigned before the bar could suspend him. She, on the other hand, didn't take it so quietly. She filed an appeal, tried to argue that my surveillance setup had invaded her privacy, but the court dismissed it before it reached hearing. The irony was perfect. The same system she used to fake her story ended up recording her own downfall. I didn't see her again after that. She moved out of the house under court order, leaving behind traces of a life that now felt like someone else's memory. clothes still hanging in the closet, notes written in her handwriting that no longer carried any weight. The ghost of a marriage that had ended long before the papers were filed. When I went back to work, my employees treated me differently. Respectfully, but distant. They knew the story now, at least the public version. The man who caught his wife forging evidence against him. It became a kind of legend around town. People called me lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt awake. The truth hadn't saved me. Preparation had. Silence had. Every time she underestimated me, I'd learned something new about patience. Because revenge wasn't the point. It was clarity. The kind you can only earn when you've lost almost everything and refuse to lose yourself. 2 months passed before the final hearing on the financial division. It should have been simple. She'd lost every argument, every legal maneuver, but people like her don't accept defeat quietly. She arrived late that morning, wearing the same polished calm she'd worn the day everything started. I could see it from across the courtroom, the flicker of defiance that always preceded another lie. But this time, she had no stage left to perform on. Her lawyer was new, younger, careful. He kept his distance, spoke softly, as if he already knew what was coming. The judge reviewed the documents without much ceremony. Ownership of the business was officially transferred solely to me. The house, the accounts, even the legal fees, everything was settled in my favor. When the judge finished, her voice carried the weight of finality. It was over. She didn't look at me as she gathered her papers. Not once. I expected anger, maybe tears, maybe some last attempt to twist the narrative, but there was nothing. Just a blank stare, the kind people wear when they finally run out of versions of themselves to pretend to be. Outside, reporters were waiting. I didn't stop. I walked past them, silent. Let them speculate. The truth didn't need my words anymore. It had already done its job. That night, I drove home and unlocked the door to a house that no longer felt haunted. The air smelled clean, the kind of stillness that doesn't demand attention. I poured a drink and stood in the living room, looking at the same walls that had once witnessed everything. The lies, the shouting, the manipulation. Now they were quiet. Paul called later to say congratulations. He said few people ever get real justice in cases like this. I told him it wasn't justice I wanted. It was closure. He paused before saying, "You got both." Maybe I did, but I learned something deeper through all of it. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't come from shouting the truth. It comes from letting it speak for itself. My wife had weaponized emotion. I'd countered it with patience. She'd tried to twist facts. I'd let time unwind them. When I turned off the lights and looked at my reflection in the window, I didn't see a man who'd won. I saw a man who'd survived. Quietly. Completely. And in this world, that's rarer than victory. 6 months after the final ruling, the story stopped being about her. People still whispered, of course, small-town habits die hard, but the noise faded with time. I rebuilt the company quietly, expanded operations into 3 new states, and hired veterans who understood structure and loyalty. The work kept me grounded. The silence, this time, felt earned. Every now and then, I'd hear her name in passing. Someone mentioned she'd moved out of state, taken a job in marketing again. Others said she was trying to start over. I never checked. I didn't need to. Her chapter in my life had closed the moment the judge's gavel hit the desk. One evening, I was reviewing footage from a recent client installation, a habit I never lost, when I found an old file still stored in one of the backups from our house system. It was a short clip, one I'd missed before. She was sitting in the living room, alone, rehearsing her testimony. Repeating phrases like lines from a script. He was controlling. He was angry. He scared me. Then she'd pause, glance at her reflection, and adjust her expression before starting again. For a long moment, I watched her face in the glow of the screen. Not out of anger, but curiosity. I tried to remember when the real her disappeared, when the person I married had turned into someone who could look at me and see an enemy. The answer never came. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. I closed the file, deleted it permanently, and shut down the system. Some truths aren't meant to be revisited. They're meant to stay buried where they lost their power. As months turned into a year, the company grew stronger than ever. Clients trusted us because of the story, because they knew I'd seen firsthand how dangerous manipulation could be, how fragile truth could seem until you had proof. My quiet reputation became my greatest marketing tool. Sometimes, late at night, I drive past the courthouse, the place where everything had come apart. The lights were always dim, the flag outside barely moving. I'd sit for a minute, then drive on, knowing I didn't know that place, or anyone in it, another word. Because I'd learned something through all of this. Power isn't about noise. It's about control. Control of yourself, your truth, your silence. She tried to destroy my name, my work, my peace. I rebuilt all of it without ever raising my voice. And in the end, that's the part she'll never understand. The quiet was my weapon all along. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.